It's such an incredible story to think that Mother Nature created the first wheat it created was a perfect wheat. And it's a bit of a shame that it wasn't intentional, but the fact that these wheats got hybridized and then all of a sudden it created this relationship we have with wheat today, where basically caused this massive gluten-free category to develop, discovering that there's actually a wheat that would solve all these wheat problems. And looking at the nutritional benefits of this wheat and the flavor, it just was pretty overwhelming. It was something we almost felt obligated to do.
Welcome to Culinary Medicine Recipe. I'm so happy you're here. I'm your host, Dr. Sabrina Falquier. I was a primary care doctor for 16 years and went to school for 4 years to specialize in culinary medicine. In this work, I get to combine my passion and expertise in both medicine and food to teach people about food as medicine and to empower them to understand what ingredients optimize health and also how to cook those ingredients to make delicious meals. On this show, I interview top chefs, doctors, healthcare visionaries, and food service professionals who are making great strides in the field of culinary medicine. Join me as we continue to explore the amazing world of culinary medicine, where I will empower you to make changes to your health and wellness with great food right away. Have you ever been to Europe and been pleasantly surprised that you can eat gluten products there, like pasta and bread, without feeling bloated or sick? In this episode, we're going to explain why with guest Werner Forster, who is the co-founder and CEO of Revival Einkorn. He's on a mission to bring back einkorn wheat, which is a certain kind of wheat celebrated for its purity, nutrient density, and yes, easier on digestion. As a bonus, you can go to Alternative Food Network's YouTube channel to see me back in the kitchen cooking with einkorn pasta, where I've made a delicious and easy pesto pasta recipe. There's a video in both English and Spanish for you. Thank you, Werner, for joining us today. Will you start by telling us where are you physically located right now, geographically?
I am in the north of Spain in Bilbao, near the ocean.
So with that in mind, and with what we're talking about today, why can some people eat gluten in Europe but not in the US?
There's a few reasons, but there's definitely a difference. The main wheat that's consumed in the US is different than what's consumed in Europe. We consume a soft wheat. In the US, it's a hard wheat, which works better for certain baking use, but it's got a stronger gluten, if you will. There's more glyphosate usage in the US. There's certain areas in Europe where you almost have no glyphosate usage, which is a definitely contributing factor. And then traditionally, people naturally ferment. When you naturally ferment, you get the results that help with digestion versus using starters. I mean, it depends on the grains you're eating as well, the types of wheat. There's quite a different amount of varieties that you consume both in the US and in Europe that plays a role. I mean, that's probably the number one factor. From our perspective, what we're trying to do is it's such an incredible story to think that Mother Nature created the first wheat it created was a perfect wheat. And it's a bit of a shame that it wasn't intentional, but the fact that these wheats got hybridized and then all of a sudden it created this relationship we have with wheat today, where basically caused this massive gluten-free category to develop. You have a lot of young people growing up not enjoying wheat anymore. We kind of lost that. You know, when we started this project, one of the things we realized is that there's a sense of nostalgia here as well to eat wheat. So for us, the beautiful thing is to be able to bring back Mother Nature's original wheat and slowly try to do our best in educating people about it, because it is the perfect food and it is the best thing you could raise your kids on and you yourself be eating as well.
So when you're growing hard wheat, like we do more in the US than in Europe, what does that affect as far as flavor profiles?
It's folks who come to Europe, you always start to experience the slight differences. You know, maybe the pasta tastes a little different. Croissants might taste a little different. And it's not necessarily always just the wheat. In the States, in the States, you have massive production for supporting different food systems. I think it has a little bit to do also with being able to get the yields, get the cost where you need it to be, and get plants to be able to produce the product they need at the volumes they need. That is a really important part in the background as a consumer you really never think about. But that's what affects a lot of times the ingredients that are in the foods that we eat, is try to create something that's tasty, whatever it is, but then you got to make it work in the production lines. And that's where you start seeing these odd ingredients or different choices around ingredients happening.
Can you describe what is the difference between natural fermentation, like using a starter, versus already made yeast? And what does that lead to as far as digestion or availability of bionutrients or the gluten itself?
Yeah, so yeast, I think, was innovated in the late 1800s. but it was a way to get what they were looking for back then. They weren't necessarily looking at the various health aspects of naturally fermenting. They were just looking again at performance. Because I'm doing naturally ferment, it takes a longer period of time. There's more risk because I need to get my temperatures right. I need to get my humidity right. And I'm using naturally occurring bacteria in my environment. I'm just creating the conditions for that bacteria to really grow. But it is more sensitive. There are situations to where it's harder to control the outcome. So for large scale manufacturing, you want to try to reduce those things that have too many changing variables. And that's really what thrusted the use of yeast forward. It makes sense. The problem is when you're using yeast, you're not fermenting the way you need to, especially the period of time required to actually create those lactic acids and really get that lactobacillus population up and convert certain fibers, creating more prebiotics. I mean, all these things that are super healthy about naturally fermented breads, if you ferment the long enough period of time, are not happening when you just throw yeast in there and go for a couple hours and then throw it in the oven. You get the rise, but you don't get all the other benefits.
Including the flavor. I'm a baker myself, so hearing all this, I recently baked my starters. I was restarting it accidentally, so I had to start from scratch in the
You
oven.
see, right there.
Yes.
Not easy.
So, all right, I want to dive into your story because just geographically of being a Southern California born and raised and traveling in different parts of the world. And before we get into the Einkorn story specifically, I'd love to hear where did food come into your existence, this wanting to go really granular and ultimately it leading to your current work?
I mean, I grew up, I was very fortunate growing up with a mom who was an amazing cook at home. So, I grew up in one of those homes where everything was cooked at home. And then my mom's from Ecuador, from South America. My father's from Germany. We traveled a lot as a kid. And then growing up in Southern California, my first job outside after university was working at a big food service distributor. So I had a bunch of restaurants that were my clients. And then I got into the natural foods industry. So I've always worked in foods. I've worked in different facets, from farming organic tropical fruit, bananas and mangoes in Ecuador, and shipping up to Whole Foods and Trader Joe's and the like. And then farming California abalone down in Chile near Patagonia, and that's all what we processed and shipped to Asia. And then came over to Portugal because, as with my wife and I, we wanted to experience Europe when the kids were still young, with the idea of maybe returning to California. And I dabbled a bit in aquaculture. So, can we do aquaculture in Europe and get into sort of an innovative area, which is land-based farming? And then where are we going to go? Well, Portugal looks like the California of Europe. It's got good waves. Well, let's go check that out. And literally we just arrived, checked out the coast and decided to move there, and then built up our activity developing land-based aqua farms for Dover sole and other things. Just always remain in the food industry, So I've not really ever worked outside of food.
So how did then Einkorn become the one piece that you wanted to really go into?
My wife's from Bulgaria, which has to do with where we discovered it, right? And when I met her, she had not been in the States too long, and she was enjoying the palm trees lining Santa Monica Boulevard. And I told her, I'm planning to move to South America. So anyways, off we went on this long, tour doing different projects. And along the way, we took a few trips back to Bulgaria. Having worked in the natural foods industry, you learn a lot about nutrition. I worked in dietary supplements for about 7 years. You really learn a lot about nutrition, right? If you're really taking it serious. So when we discovered Einkorn, we started to research it, and we're pretty blown away. If you read up on Einkorn, it's fascinating. At first, it seems like a little too much because you're talking about wheat, but the reality is it's just an incredible story at many angles. But from the nutrition standpoint, so having the background that we had and having experience in launching and developing brands in the natural products industry, and then discovering that there's actually a wheat that would solve all these wheat problems, and looking at the nutritional benefits of this wheat and the flavor, it just was pretty overwhelming. It was something we almost felt obligated to do, So we started with us just consuming the wheat. We got rid of all our other flours in the house. That was about 20 years ago. So my children grew up on Einkorn. My wife also is amazing in the kitchen, loves baking, loves all these things. So we used it personally for about 10, 12 years, made everything under the sun with it, then started to take it a bit more serious and looking at the farming side and what varieties we should have and the genetic purity and then commissioning some very deep studies around exact at the molecular level, the various components that make up this wheat versus other wheats and other grains. We've published a book on it called Einkorn Explained. Fun reading for the nutritionist or the dietitian, but it was important for us to really develop a sort of a scientific platform that we could communicate from, as we realized along the way, wow, this is potentially an important thing we're going to introduce to the industry. We better know what we're talking about, type of thing.
Yes, I have been reading. It's been my bedside reading for the last couple months is
Super exciting.
it's exactly this. Yes. But I'm one of those people, I'll be reading a book and learning about different salt crystals and my husband will laugh. He's like, I'm as enthralled with that as a murder mystery. It's like, did you know this? So I'm right up your alley. So one of the big pictures, kind of Cliff's Notes version that comes up is hybridized versus non-hybridized. And assuming our listeners don't know anything about those terms, could you give us a definition or an explanation that might help people understand part of the reason that Einkorn is what you chose to really dive personally in and into your work?
So, not to confuse with genetically modified, you're actually removing a gene from one plant or animal and putting it into another plant or animal. Here, you're just crossbreeding something that typically in nature would never happen, either because they're not endemic in the same location, saying they're not from the same location. So you're taking a plant or a grass from China and you're crossing it with a wheat somewhere in Europe. That probably would never happen in nature, or it's unlikely to happen. But you're not modifying directly the genetics. It's the entire plants combined. But they do result in a change in the molecular structure of many of the components. Now, having said that, though, depending on the category that you're working with, plants, stone fruit, avocados versus grasses versus macroalgae in the ocean, when these things cross, they don't necessarily always have as much of a change occurring. And grass and wheats are one of those things that actually change a lot. So unfortunately, when they were hybridizing for good reason to try to create wheat that would generate more protein, more food per acre or per hectare, and grow in a way that was easier to harvest, because back then they were trying to get more yield. Well, they were also dramatically changing the starches and the peptides, the proteins, the glutens. All these things changed quite a bit. But that's what's we've come to get to know so well over the last 50 years.
So tell us about Einkorn. Is it hybridized? Is it not? And what does that lead to as far as the quality of the product?
Yeah, so it's not hybridized. It's the only one that's not hybridized. Now, there's currently considered to be about 400 varieties of einkorn. We only know of about 23 that are considered genetically pure. So there are some einkorns that might have some components of other grasses or wheats. There's some we've tracked in the States, for example, that have emmer. It's another type of wheat, right? Triticum dicocum is the scientific name, but they can find some of that in some of the einkorn that you might have in certain markets, or up in Canada as well, for example. So if you can get genetically pure einkorn, that's never been hybridized. It only has one set of chromosomes. And so it's a very simple plant, and it's something that us humans have been consuming for a very long time. So our bodies are well adapted to digest and assimilate it. Every other wheat on the planet has had some level of hybridization. 95% of what we consume has had enough of a hybridization to where you have 3 sets of chromosomes. And it's that second and third set of chromosomes, they're called BBDD, to be a little technical, but those are the ones that really where you find the problems, basically. So it's very interesting. It breaks down to the molecular structure of the plant.
And you mentioned problems. So if we're looking at solutions, it sounds like einkorn is one of those. So what does hybridization do to the nutrients, the ability to digest, and the flavor of the wheat?
So it changes all of those. I think one of the most important ones is the amount of, say, antigens that you find present in most of the hybridized wheats. Spelt, modern wheat are very commonly consumed, in the States, and those are ones that the antigen levels are quite high, which directly leads to inflammation. No? So it's especially after the pandemic, we're all much more aware of the importance of keeping inflammation low in our diets. And einkorn is showing indications in its whole meal state, to actually show some potential anti-inflammatory properties, which is amazing. The nutrient levels, there's maybe some nutrients that are just not there. There's some types of fibers that are not there anymore. You have a nice breadth of total nutrients and minerals. But then on some key nutrients like protein, you have, say, sometimes up to 40% higher protein in einkorn, genetically pure einkorn, versus all other wheats. If you're farmed exactly the same way, that's important, because obviously you can put fertilizer in one and not in the other and get more protein. But if they're farmed the same way, their natural ability to convert into nutrient density, up to 40% more protein, up to 300% more antioxidants, which is huge. And again, a slightly different profile of fibers, seeing more prebiotic fibers as well. So, and it's a great source of a lot of essential minerals as well. So we consider it the perfect food. I don't know. I grew up with thinking about flour as something that you just added butter and sugar to, and never really something too nutritious. But the reality is all flours have important levels of nutrition in them. The very first one that wasn't hybridized is really it's like the original superfood. Really, it's impressive.
And I really appreciate that you're talking about protein. We tend to have these, square off, like I need my protein, I need my grains, that those are often separated, and bringing up the fact that there is in whole grains, there is protein in it innately. So it's not one or the other. So I'm glad that you plucked that out specifically. And the micronutrients that you're mentioning as well. So if somebody has celiac disease, can they eat einkorn wheat?
Legally, you cannot recommend it, right? In the States, just for starters, and in most countries in Europe or all of Europe, can't do it. What we've seen in research is delayed reactions or no reaction. There's three things you need to develop celiac disease as we understand it today. One of those is the genetic propensity. The other one we mentioned was the glyphosate, and the other is the strong glutens. With those three, you're highly likely to develop, right? So the genetic propensity could just be unlucky. It's a bit like being allergic to other foods that are good for you. I can't eat kiwi. My wife can't eat kiwi, for example. Kiwi is super nutritious. So, however, it is true that if a celiac, you have different levels of celiac too. So the severe, I wouldn't recommend it. We do know of plenty who have tried it lightly, and can actually. But stage before that, the non-celiac gluten sensitive can consume it, and that's scientifically validated, but we have thousands of consumers who eat big bowls of pasta and have absolutely no reaction whatsoever. So, but in our Einkorn Explained booklet, we go into that a bit deeper as well, which you can find on the website.
Yeah, and to emphasize the Dr. Falquier had on coming here of really the difference between gluten sensitivity versus celiac disease, and making sure that you work with your healthcare provider and a specialist in this, and to take this information as informational only and not medical advice. So how is einkorn wheat grown? Because in my head, okay, so you have not just one of the reasons of hybridization, again, was for yields, but also to resist maybe environments that weren't as hospitable for certain things that you were growing. So how is it grown, and how have you in this process found the space where it can thrive in its absolute natural environment?
It's another one of the really cool things about Einkorn. It's one of our farmers. I love that he's always called it the sabio. You speak Spanish, no? It's the one that knows, and they like the way they call it agarrar. It kind of sets its roots into the soil, exactly. And they're working all the crops, right? These guys have worked a lot of different crops, all certified organic lands for decades. These are small families, or sometimes families have bigger land that they manage. So that's the kind of things that they pay attention to, right? And then they may have areas of land that don't have irrigation or don't get good rainfall, or maybe the nutritional level and the soil isn't where it should be. So they just can't get the yields with other crops that they need to get. And we've actually been able to have some decent success, which makes sense when you think of this particular. If you have a genetically pure one, it's dating back beyond 14,000 years. It's a survivor. It knows how to survive. It doesn't get great yields, but it also gets you a yield. So even if you have a drought season, or you have a cold winter, or a very hot summer, whatever you have, it tends to get a fairly predictable yield. It really knows how to take advantage of what's in that soil. At the farm level, regenerative farming is big today, and it's just going to keep getting bigger and bigger. Certified organic is super important. Regenerative farming makes a ton of sense, since you're also protecting the soil, reinvigorating the soil, really, right? So you're going to get the maximum out of the plant, and you allow that soil to take care of itself. Einkorn fits perfectly into that, because it doesn't need, at least our experience, it doesn't need any inputs from a farming perspective. It means no fertilizer, You don't need to deal with the pests. Einkorn naturally is a competitor against weeds, so you don't have to worry too much about from the herbicide perspective. It's a natural competitor, right? It sets its roots. It's going to grow. It's going to be sort of the dominant plant in that area. So it makes the farmer's job easier from that perspective. And then it's really nutrient efficient. So if you're rotating like they did in the early Neolithic period, rotating with garbanzos and lentils that are setting nitrogen, well, that's all you really need to do. I mean, you need to manage in a regenerative way, so you've got the soil retaining water enough and holding a certain amount of nutrient or nutrient forming microorganisms. Not to get too technical on this, but then you're going to have good, consistent yields that allows it to be economically sustainable as well for the farmers in this market that we work in.
It really is a sense of working with nature rather than against it.
100%. The cool thing about that is, like, look, these farmers are growing up in sort of a very conventional way. They've had, 2-3 generations ahead of them farming in ways that they've sort of been taught over the years. They're not getting into it necessarily on the per product basis like what we're looking at Einkorn. They're looking at just trying to feed their families with their land. And when we start to work with them on Einkorn, they become really engaged because they start to see what you just mentioned. They start to see Mother Nature take over, and every year, and they feel a part of it. The head of the Organic Farming Association in Andalusia in the south of Spain is one of our head farmers, and he's absolutely thrilled. In the beginning, he was very nervous because it's all a bit new. It's a very nice experience to get a farmer on the program and let them see how that fits into their whole plan.
Even this one you're talking about, I can see you light up with the relationships that you've built and had to build, because there has to be this trust with the farmers, especially if they're switching over from a different commodity. I can only imagine when that whole cycle is feeding on itself, pun intended, of how that plays out on multiple levels. It's really fantastic to hear. Can you paint a picture of what is the land like? What's the temperature like? Is there seasonality where einkorn grows best?
Yeah, it doesn't, from our experience at least, it doesn't grow great where all wheat grows necessarily. I think it has to do with the variety. Remember, these are not hybridized. So one of the reasons you do hybridized wheat too is you try to get it to do better in other parts of the world. And these come originally from sort of the Crescent Valley, coming across west all the way to, say, Portugal. So in that Mediterranean climate zone, it does very well. In Spain, where we're farming it, I would say it's just a few degrees warmer overall than the typical Mediterranean climate. So like us, it loves great climate.
Again, working with nature, not against it.
Yeah.
So now we talked about it, and I'm happy to say that I have experienced and tasted the amazing products that you make. So this is growing in Spain. You're bringing it into the US. And what is that looking like? And what are the products that you have?
So yeah, the idea is that as people get to like einkorn, which I'm happy that you are, Sabrina, they just want to start eating things with einkorn, which we figured is going to happen. It's like what happened with quinoa and these other grains. And so we started with pasta, figuring like we got to make things that people actually can eat and want to eat on a regular basis. So we have a line of Italian pastas that we make with 100% wholemeal einkorn. And then we've introduced also a line of crackers. Those are also, they're sourdough crackers, handmade, and 4 different flavors. We've got a spicy garlic flavor. We've got the original flavor. It's all made with all 100% organic ingredients and organic olive oil only, organic sea salt, and then the various ingredients for those 4 flavors, with other flavors to come, other types of pasta to come. But then we also want to get into other categories. We're even looking at frozen sliced bread, of course, pizza, breakfast cereal. Obviously, we're going to continue working as hard as we can to keep growing the supply and building other exciting products and bringing them to market. But we're parents, we've got kids, educate ourselves on food. It's worth spending a little bit of time, whether it's our einkorn or anybody else's einkorn. I get asked many times, are you going to patent your seed, your variety? It's like, no, that kind of defeats the purpose. If we just do what we're doing, we should be fine as far as a business. But we want everybody farming and eating einkorn. It's like an essential food, right? So that's our goal.
How can people find you?
On our website, revivaleinkorn.com. It's got loads of information there. And then the classic Instagram, Revival Einkorn's the handle on that.
Thank you so much, Werner, for your expertise and for your passion that has led to this work that so many of us get to benefit from the farmers to us that get to enjoy the product.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
I hope you feel motivated by this episode. Please leave us a rating and a review and mention our show to others who you think could use this information. That could be your doctor. It could be somebody who works in the food service industry who's interested in the health components. It could be a friend that is working on their health journey. If you want to hear more, please remember to follow Culinary Medicine Recipe on your favorite podcast listening platform. Until next time, salud and bon appetit. All content provided or opinions expressed in this episode are for informational purposes only and are not a substitute for professional medical advice. Please seek advice from your doctor or other qualified healthcare professional.
It is Ryan Seacrest here. There was a recent social media trend which consisted of flying on a plane with no music, no movies, no entertainment. But a better trend would be going to ChumbaCasino.com. It's like having a mini social casino in your pocket. Chumba Casino has over 100 online casino-style games, all absolutely free. It's the most fun you can have online and on a plane. So grab your free welcome bonus now at ChumbaCasino.com. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.